For 8 months during the Second World War, people across the United Kingdom were under attack nearly every night in a bombing campaign known as the Blitz. But what was it like to live during that time? Well, with us now is Patrick Macdougall, who lived in Edinburgh during the war, and Duncan Barrett, author of Blitz Kids. Good to have you both with us. Thank you for sharing your time. Patrick, if you will, take us back 80 years ago. Where would we have found you during the Blitz?
80 years ago, I was a child in Edinburgh. And on the 8th of May, it was my mother's birthday, so we were first of all celebrating that. But soon the news broke that VE Day, and my father decided that that evening he would take me up Arthur's Seat, which is a hill in Edinburgh, and my mother couldn't come because my 8-month-old sister needed looking after. So it was just us. We went up as far as I could get, and we sat down and we watched as the blackout curtains were torn down and twinkling lights suddenly appeared all over Edinburgh, all over the city. It was magical. I've never forgotten it. And it was such a good place to see it all from. You were looking down on the city and suddenly a window lighting up there, another window lighting up there, because although it wasn't yet fully dark, people were putting on all their lights and taking down the curtains and celebrating, I suppose you'd say. It was, as I say, magical.
A very kind of strong, powerful metaphor for what had just been announced earlier that day.
Yeah, absolutely. At the time, I thought it was part of my mother's birthday celebration.
The innocence and purity of children. Eh? And talk to me about being a child, being moved during the Blitz. It's a story that many experienced. But what was
this, of course, is not a direct memory of mine, but at the beginning of sometime early in 1940, my father feared that Edinburgh was going to be bombed just like London. It wasn't in the end, but he thought it was. And he evacuated my mother to a cottage 20 miles away from Edinburgh in the middle of nowhere with me, aged a year or two. And that was all fine, except that only a few days after we'd moved there, the first German aircraft to be shot down in Scotland landed about 120 metres away. And my mother moved us back to Edinburgh the following day. And when I asked her, years later, well, I said, did you feel you were more at risk in the country? No, she said. I had to move back to escape the press.
You were being hounded even 80 years ago.
It was a big local story for all the Scottish newspapers, and they all had journalists and so on there, and she was fed up.
And these are stories that you've pulled together, and I guess there's such a breadth and variety of experiences. Some of kind of almost kind of wry humour in kind of escaping the press, through to children and families who were torn apart, during this time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we interviewed about 80-odd people researching this book, and their stories really do kind of run the gamut. When the book was published, we sent copies to our interviewees, and that was their first opportunity to read other people's stories, essentially. And one guy I interviewed in Birmingham, actually, which did have a pretty bad Blitz, one of the worst outside London, but he had quite a good war, as you might say. Like, he really enjoyed himself collecting shrapnel and playing in the bomb sites and so on. And he said, when I read some of these other stories of people whose parents died or their pets were killed or all these terrible things happened, he felt quite bad. He said, my war, I basically enjoyed myself. I shouldn't say it, but I was sad when the war ended because it was so much fun. But I said to him, that's kind of what the book is about, is we're trying to capture the breadth of those experiences from, the tragic and the terrible experiences right the way through to the joy and the kind of innocence of childhood that survives even the worst situations.
1945, 8th 8th of May. What were the preceding months like? Once those lights had come back on, once the light was back in the world, certainly in Edinburgh for you, what were the preceding months, the months post like?
Well, they were pretty grey by comparison. And in fact, in early 1946, my parents, particularly my mother, who, being Australian, found Edinburgh greyer than some, decided to emigrate. And they emigrated to Kenya, which is where I spent the rest of my childhood. So I didn't have that much experience of UK after the war, just the next 9 months or so before they left.
Really appreciate you both coming in and joining us. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for bringing them together. Plenty more coverage on VE Day here on Sky News.